Okay, hello everybody. I almost said Wednesday. It is not Wednesday, it's Thursday. We are in fact live. I was just double checking that. So here we go. Hello, welcome to Photo Lab. Today is a very special show. I'm super excited about this. For a couple of reasons. Number one, just a second show for Mark and I being back after all the moving into the new studio and all of the stuff and house and things and stuff. But more importantly, we have, as you can see on your screen, echo. Okay, let me fix sound stuff. Sorry, gang. My bad. Give me a moment to sort the sound situation out. I forgot to turn off all the extra sources. Okay.
Always something.
Okay, that should hopefully sort the echo out. Let us know out there in YouTube land on the other end if you can still hear that echo or not.
Oh, it's good.
Good. Okay. Good. Excellent. All right. So, as I was saying, very excited because, as you can see on screen, we have a special guest with us here. This is Dave, and I think I know how to say your last name, Dave. I come from the honored group of people that have crazy names that get mangled all the time. So, yes. I was saying it thinking like Doppler radar, which I'm sure is the most common thing, but I think it's more like Dave is dope, right? Like Dave Doeppel?
Exactly. That is it.
Oh, nice.
Dave Doeppel, award-winning LA-based photographer here, and I'm going to let you introduce yourself and share a little bit about yourself with the crowd, and if you want, you can just tell folks how we met too.
Yeah, absolutely. We actually met actually not that long ago.
Yeah.
Three or 4 weeks ago at WPPI. We have a mutual friend, Aaron Pribble, who's an amazing model. And so we didn't get to hang out, but
yeah,
we ran into each other quite a few times during the few days that I was there.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I'm a photographer. I got started back in junior high, which was, millions of years ago. And I'd forgotten everything I learned about photography at that point in time. My wife and I started a photography business back in about 2009. She wanted to shoot weddings, and I was doing mostly back-end processing Lightroom stuff. I was second shooting her as well. Not real fond of weddings. But I got really good at Lightroom, and I was starting to teach a lot of local photographers. Ended up getting certified by Adobe in 2013. And then since then, I've been certified by Adobe in Photoshop. I earned my CPP, Certified Professional Photographer, with PPA, as well as my photographic craftsman degree. So after I got out of the wedding biz with my wife, I started shooting more pinup and boudoir and kind of landscape stuff. So doing not as much portraiture anymore. I'm kind of moved on into shooting automotive stuff, doing some light painting. So little bits here and there.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
But mostly I teach Lightroom and Photoshop.
Cool. Very, very cool. So what we usually like to do at the beginning of the show is give everybody an update as to what we've been doing, like photographically or otherwise, and then give everybody in the chat a chance to also share what they've been up to. So as usual, we do want to know from you guys who are here with us watching. Let us know in the chat what you've been up to, photographically or otherwise. And if we want to just go around, Mark and then Dave, and then I'll wrap up. Let the gang know what we've been up to this week.
Yeah, sounds good. So last weekend I actually had a shoot with my friend Kim. It was basically Kim, and there were 5 other photographers here. So we had a good time. It's sort of a theme shoot. and it was good fun. I actually got to test out my new light modifier too, so that was good.
And that was that Newer one you got, right? Or was that?
No, photodiox.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. So I could actually show one of the pictures, I suppose.
Oh
too.
yeah. You should pop that in.
Yeah, just give me 1 second here, and I'll find it in my library here.
Alrighty. I'm gonna switch over to the layout too, so that people can see it nice and biggened.
Oops. Hold on a second.
This is new to us here, like setting this up and then sharing our screens all together with this Lightroom topic for tonight. So there'll be little bits like this where we figure out how to change and do some of these things. So Dave, how was your? Well, Mark's grabbing up the photo. How was your week photographically? Anything exciting on your end?
Well, I did last weekend. I finally got to shoot a 1970 Camaro that had been scheduled for weeks, and every weekend it rained. And then we're in the midst of rain again today.
So you've got rain. Andre in the chat said he's got a blizzard. Now, Dave,
yeah.
is that the one you were telling me about last night?
Yes.
Okay, so you got to tell people a little bit about that, particularly how many shots you've got as part of this project.
We can, as soon as we look at Mark's stuff here, I can pull that up.
Okay, Mark, so tell us about the shot here.
Yeah, so basically, we had this, I don't know what they call them, these globes that had those electric things come out of them. Like when you touch it and they kind of attract to you. But we didn't have it plugged in because it would have been difficult to capture it anyway. So I made this swirl in Photoshop in a separate document, and then brought it into Lightroom, into this photo, so I could add it into the globe. And then I also added a bit of green glow on her hands and her lower chest just to make it look realistic. And I have to give you credit for that idea.
It looks really good. I particularly like the flares you added, or the reflective sort of the octagonal or whatever shape on the edges of the glass bulb. That was a nice touch with your.
Actually, I didn't add that. That was actually from the original photo.
Oh, interesting. Okay, it worked out really well.
Yeah, definitely did.
All right, Dave, did you want to show it on your screen?
Yeah. Let me pop that on here.
Awesome. All righty.
Okay, there we go. So what we're looking at here are just the individual shots, and I think I ended up shooting about 205 frames, and I ended up with 186 that I'm going to use to piece this together. And so it's just using constant lights or little flashlights. And when we get down in here, you see a lot of this looks pretty dark, but it was literally just individual sections. Let's see if I can, like here. So I was just lighting up some of these little strips in here. And so the final result, I haven't finished, but you can see I'm just pulling in little pieces of all those different exposures and building up this composite. So.
And how many total exposures is that?
I pulled out of the 200 something I shot. I'm going to work with about 186 exposures.
So that means he's going to have 186 layers in this final image, roughly speaking.
The only good thing is, if you look at, we can actually look at these layers. It's only a little tiny fraction.
Right.
So I'm not pulling in like the full image every single time. I'm only pulling in like this little tiny piece and then just masking it out.
Right. So that'll save on the document size a little bit.
Yeah, it doesn't end up being as huge as you would think it would be.
Right. I'm just thinking about managing 186 layers.
I know. Yeah, it's a lot.
Right.
Did you mention it? How long did it take to do the shoot?
It's probably a couple hours to actually do the shoot.
That's not as bad as I thought it would be.
No, once it's set up, I do it with a Cam Ranger. So my wife actually has the Cam Ranger software on an iPod, and so I just tell her when to open the shutter and when to close it.
Okay.
So there's a little bit of experimentation while you're doing it to figure out exposure. But then once you kind of get it dialed in, it starts going pretty quick.
Okay.
That's cool.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
All right. So as for me, I haven't been doing much in terms of taking photos, but working here in the studio and just finishing setup in here. So you can't see it because I'm deliberately keeping it kind of dim behind me in these live streams, but I have curtains up on what will be the door entries into the studio here just to help block out light when I want to block it. And I actually cleaned up the studio. Mostly, my desk is still kind of a travesty, but that's in part because like this area right over here that you can kind of see is my current staging area for all the tools that I'm using to just do all of the little things around the house. And then off to my left here, you can't see it at all, but I've got like a stack of hard drives and a bunch of other miscellaneous crap piled up. But what's great is like all of this space behind me now is empty and clean, whereas last week, if you guys remember, it was like boxes and piles of crap everywhere. Yeah, it was just crap everywhere. So I'm very happy to have this cleaned up. The next thing I want to do is some acoustic treatments. I'm trying to figure out how to hang up my panels, but I'm not quite figured out how I'm going to do that or even how I'm going to lay it out yet.
It doesn't sound as echoey this week as it did last week either.
Yeah, I mean, just the curtains in here and the carpet that I have on the floor, just that made a huge difference in terms of managing the echo. But even as I'm sitting here, like I can hear a little bit of that reverberation, the little bit of that echo. But I know it's already not bad. So when I add the treatments, I know I want to do some on the ceiling and the corner and the bit of wall to my left here. I think that's really going to make it nice and clean sounding.
Right. Did you put carpet on the whole floor, just like an area rug?
It's just an area rug right here. This is exciting news. So if you're not familiar with the situation here, right now the floor in my studio is OSB board. It's just subfloor because a friend of mine is actually giving me a whole mess of laminate, but we had to wait for spring so that it could be gotten to because of snow and ice and piles of crap. Well, we can now get to it. I ran into him today at Home Depot on the way home when I stopped to grab a couple things. And he showed me where it is. He's like, you can come get it anytime now. So I don't know when, but sooner than I thought, we'll probably be working on the flooring in here. The downside to that is I literally just finished putting all of this desk together, and I'm going to have to take it all down in order to put the floor in here. Because I thought it was going to be like another couple months or something.
That's funny.
It is pretty hilarious. So that's what I've been up to. Andre says, what I've been up to lately, I've been selling lots of prints, had never sold any until 2018, but it really took off much better than I anticipated. That is super cool, and I already put this in the chat, but Andre, if you would care to share some of your experience in building up to those print sales, I think people would find that very, very helpful information. That's super exciting because I know for a lot of people, print sales is one of the things that they attempt as a way to try to earn an income from photography. And we've talked about this before. It is a challenging thing to do. It's not impossible, clearly, but it's something that takes, like anything worth doing, takes a good deal of effort to successfully build something like that up.
Yep.
Jason says he's been pretty easygoing, nothing major going on. Haven't shot many pictures, couple of candid shots of the kids. Sounds boring, but with everything else going on, I'll take boring. Hey, yeah.
Boring would be good after this week.
Right, no kidding. And Peter was asking if that is Kim that you shot in the hay bales, which I believe that's right. She was in the hay field with you?
Yeah.
Excellent.
We've shot together easily half a dozen times now. Yeah.
It's great when you find a good model that you can collaborate with on the regular. I love that I have a number of models that I can work with regularly. Yeah. I am sad, although she's moving closer to you, Dave, that Erin is leaving me here and coming into your neighborhood.
That is exciting news for me.
That it is. Let's see. Ricky says, I've been doing quite a bit of work building new looks for my portfolio. That's very cool. And playing around with my new lights. Very, very cool. Finally took the plunge on two 8200s. They're awesome. I love those lights.
Yes.
I love those lights. Do you use those lights, Dave?
I am a MoLight Pro Team member. So
okay.
All my light is MoLights, Godox.
Mm-hmm.
But I buy everything from Michael Mowbray.
Nice.
So yeah, I've got 8200s. I've got the 8360 version 2s, which I love.
Mm-hmm.
Those are still, I think, my favorite lights, even though they've got a separate battery pack. I just clip it on the stand, and they're super lightweight, and those batteries last forever.
That's one of the things I love about the 200s too.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. I'd like to get a chance to try the 600, the new 600s. I haven't tried any. I didn't try version 1 or version 2, but I've read a bit and seen photographers talking about how much they love those lights. And based on my experience with the 200s, they seem like they're really, really great.
I have the original, this 8600 BM, which doesn't do TTL, which is fine with me. I don't care about that.
Yeah, I'm with you on that.
High-speed sync. I did that last year. I took it to St. Louis and did we went out and shot a bunch of pinup out on Route 66.
Nice.
And I wonder if I have some of those images here. That was the first night. Yeah, and really all I use, here's some. Let's see. So that was shot with the 8600.
Very nice.
And just I had a beauty dish that's kind of a knockoff of the Mola SETI.
Okay.
And so it's a super awesome light. The new one obviously has TTL and a bunch of other features. I haven't seen that yet, but
okay.
Great lights.
Very
their batteries are just amazing.
Can't go wrong with that. Good batteries is so important.
Oh yeah. You can have a good light with a crap battery.
Yeah.
But I'd rather have a not so good light with a good battery.
Yep.
Right.
I'm with you on that. Jonathan says nothing photography-wise for a while, but should start to pick up really quick at this time of year. That's always good when you know you're getting into that busy season. Yeah. Hello to Emmanuel. And Jason says, have I done the flooring? Nope. Going to be doing that soon. Andre says, I had a seaweed treatment company buy a photo of mine for their CEO's office. So it's a coastal photo that shows seaweed in it. And the administrative assistant there found my photo on Instagram. So he says, continuing with that, and I took advantage of a government program that funded $1,000 to every single school in New Brunswick to buy artwork. So I sold 4 pieces through that program, 4 huge acrylics. That's awesome.
Yep.
And then now I've been doing prints through Zeno. I find that the quality is really good and the prices are great too. I've bought a couple of their albums. They do some really nice work. That's really fantastic, Andre. I'm glad to hear that. And what it sounds like is it's oftentimes like that first sale that sort of triggers an avalanche of things happening that puts you in the right direction. That's pretty awesome. All right, let's see what else everybody up here is up to. Jason says, I saw a huge canvas print being done at the local photo shop. It was something like 72 by 24 or something like that. That's cool. I love big prints. I love big prints.
It's hard to go wrong with a big print.
It really is. Hey, Tim made it. Good to see you, Tim. Ricky says, I got the AD-B2 adapter to shoot with both 200s on one stand. I've been thinking about getting one of those.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
They also, the other benefit of that is the modeling lights that it has on it.
Yes.
Which is great.
And Sandy says she might buy an M50. Says it's got the eye autofocus. Will that feature work with the adapter using my EF lenses? So that should. And with the M50, you've got the dual pixels, so it should be really excellent. But do bear in mind that, granted, it is a Canon adapter, so that should alleviate some of the lag that you might experience in autofocus. But even so, being an adapted lens, it might not be like, instantaneously fast or whatever, but because it's Canon adapter to a Canon lens on a Canon camera, I can't imagine you'll experience any significant problems with autofocus there. Excuse me. Thomas is here too. Steve said, went walking around today, probably about 3 to 4 miles down some trails, doing some birding with the 200 to 500 for a few hours, and got me an 85 1.8. Ooh, nice. The feeling of new gear. Yeah. And Andre also says, raising my prices also helped in selling prints. Just goes to show you don't want to undersell yourself. Yeah.
That's huge.
That's huge. Yep. All right. I'd love to know what you guys think of this, Mark and Dave. So Thomas just said, new AI Canon auto flash is coming out soon. Anyone see it?
Did you see it at WPPI?
I didn't see it at WPPI, but I saw enough videos of it that I thought this just seems like craziness.
That's not the same thing.
It's got a very specific demographic in mind.
Mm-hmm.
I could see it for somebody as a starter flash that's getting into events or weddings, that has not learned much about lighting. I'll leave it at that. It was very cool watching it work.
I bet.
And the demo, I'm friends with Eric Stoner, works for Canon. He was doing the demo at their booth, and it was pretty cool. It'll automatically, it kind of works like TTL.
Right.
It does a pre-flash, and then it does another flash to measure kind of the room, and then it'll twist itself around. But if you put it into a particular position, and then you hit a button on it, it'll hold that position there. And even if you rotate the camera, it'll flip itself back around to point to that same place. So
now that I could see being super helpful when you're running and gunning and you're flipping between portrait and landscape and portrait and landscape.
That's basically what I would see. Really,
but it's not
running and gunning.
It's not a powerful flash. I think it's a 470, so it's going to probably, the guide number is a 47 compared to 58 or 60 on the other. So
basically, like you say, it's sort of like taking auto flash to the next level with adding automatic bounce to that, which I could see that being helpful for people who are learning too, like you say, or definitely just that sort of maintain position feature. That I didn't realize it did, and I think that alone for a running gunner makes it worthwhile.
Yeah, it'll definitely be a good entry lens for a lot of people. Yeah.
Ricky says it seems kind of cool but kind of gimmicky. I think it's a little bit of both. It's a little bit cool but a little bit gimmicky at the same time. Right. It's certainly got people talking about Canon, and that's never a bad thing for a company. So
PR it usually isn't bad.
Right, exactly.
PR, but even still, sometimes still drives people to them. So
I mean, you know what they say, right? There's no such thing as bad press or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, look at Logan Paul, right? The guy does whatever he does, and he bounces back, and he's still, making whatever crazy good money doing whatever the heck he's doing. So anyway,
whoever that is,
yeah, exactly, whoever that is, right? So let's talk about Lightroom, right? Dave, you're a certified Adobe Lightroom master, professional, expert. Mark and I are, we've used Lightroom a lot, experts. And we're here to answer your questions.
I like to think with Lightroom, I'm probably like 80%. I'm pretty good with Lightroom, but Photoshop's a different story.
Yeah, I feel confident in both programs. I do more of my work in Photoshop, but that's retouching and things along that lines. But I use Lightroom a ton too because it is my asset manager, and I do process all my RAWs through it. So, you can use one, you can use the other, you can use them complementary. It's whatever a person's workflow happens to be.
Yep. I'm kind of like you. I use it as my central, digital asset management. library, and then I go off from there. And even though there's a lot of plugins and things where you can send like right into something like On One or Luminar from Lightroom,
Right.
I tend to always go to Photoshop first, and then I'll run plugins or whatever from there, and then it ends up back in Lightroom. So.
Okay. I've never been a plugin user. I've tried a couple here and there, and it might be that I just don't give them enough of a chance, or it might be that I just don't really, because I know how to do the things that I want to do in Photoshop. I'm not seeing the usefulness of going to a separate plugin.
Right.
But I just haven't been a person who uses plugins very much. Like the sort of plugin you just mentioned, like Luminar, or maybe like the Nick Suite, or the Alien Skin, or any of those other third-party. What's the other one? Topaz.
Topaz, Topaz has some different, like Topaz Remask, I think, is amazing for cutting things out of the background. I don't think there's a better program than Remask.
Okay, well, then I'm going to look at that, because I want to get better at masking, and if there's software that'll help me do that.
Yeah, even with the new, I just showed it last night, the new select subject feature in Photoshop. It's okay if you've got an image that was shot on a white or gray. It's pretty easy to cut that out using the new select subject feature, but you get something with a complex background, and it's it falls a little short.
Yeah, you have to have good separation for sure.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's probably the case. Well, how does that Topaz Remask work on a more complicated subject like that without a nice, clean, selectable background, so to speak?
So the way it works is you tell it what you want to keep, what you want to get rid of, and then with a brush tool, you brush along the edge of where it's more complex.
Okay.
And depending on, you don't have to be as precise as you do in Photoshop when you're trying to use like the pen tool or something for outlining. But the more you can zoom in on the image and the smaller you can make the brush, the better it does at calculating that edge.
Okay.
So it does a really good job, and it's pretty fast.
I'm going to have to look into that then, because I've talked about this over the last year. I want to get better at doing composite style work.
Right.
And it's something that I've been learning about, and one of the things I know I need to be a lot better at is masking. So that sounds like a tool that I would find very worthwhile. Got to say thank you to Thomas Giuliano for that super chat, $10 super chat. That is hugely appreciated.
Yep,
thank you very much. We always appreciate your support when you choose to do so monetarily. That's always welcome. Joe's got a question for us. But before we jump to that real quick, what we were talking about kind of piggybacks on a question we did get for tonight's show about Lightroom from Kevin on Facebook, who said, can I post a general question? If you had to choose one, Lightroom or Photoshop, which would it be, and one short reason why? And I sort of already answered it with my statement, which would be that because the majority of the work that I do is in Photoshop, if I had to choose one and I could only use one, like if it was one or the other and there's no other choice, I would choose Photoshop, because that's where the bulk of my work is done, and I can still do the raw processing there. But I like using them as complementary pieces of software, because I think you said this, Dave, I think you said that Lightroom is the best asset manager out there, and I personally agree with you on that.
Yeah, they've definitely had performance issues up until the latest release.
No doubt.
You had to be aware and really understand kind of the mechanics behind what it was doing, which is building previews,
right,
and storing things in a database. So, but to answer that question, you don't have to choose,
right?
Because for $9.99 a month, you get both of them, and you always get the most up-to-date version.
Yeah. So
there's no way to not have both of them anymore, because you can't buy standalone version of either.
Well, actually, Lightroom, they did come out with their Lightroom plan, which is just Lightroom. It's the same price as the photography plan, so you can technically still just get Lightroom.
I think that's only Lightroom CC though.
Yeah, I think so too. I don't think
that's only the
classic.
mobile version.
Oh, okay. I thought it included also classic. No, you're right.
I think it's just the CC
You're
version.
right. Yep. Although, not to be an I'm right kind of guy, but as I recall, when CC was announced, they did say that they will still sell the standalone Lightroom 6 indefinitely. But the box version is probably a bad buy at this point because it is in end of life. It is no longer receiving updates.
Yeah, there will be no more updates to it. So, but I get people every day that are still using Lightroom 5.
Yep, I've talked to people who's doing the same.
And the question I always get is, I just bought a new camera and it's not working.
Right. That's because you're a little bit behind there.
It's a little behind. So
yeah. So
but yeah, if I had to choose one again, like you said, I would probably choose Photoshop.
Okay.
Because you do, along with Photoshop, you get Bridge for free, which I hate.
I do too.
And it does have some similar functionality to Lightroom, but very convoluted. And it's just an old interface. So
old and archaic.
You could get by.
Yeah, I had a couple people on Facebook say, like, I don't use Lightroom. I can do it all with Photoshop and Bridge, and that's great if that works for you. Yeah. Mark, I think you're the opposite of us, though, aren't you?
Yeah, exactly. I've really never had Photoshop until I subscribed to the CC probably about a year ago or whatever it was. I'd always use standalone versions of Lightroom, so for me, Lightroom's just regular nature for me. But I'm starting to use Photoshop a little bit more here and there. But for the type of work I do, I can do most of it in Lightroom anyways.
Yeah, so I'm curious to know what everybody else watching would choose if you had to choose. Andre just said he's 99.5% Lightroom, similar to you, Mark.
Yeah.
And we've got a couple questions related to this too. So I lost it. It was, let me get it up here. Here we go. Joe Ash wanted to know if tethering has been improved in the latest version of Lightroom. And because I shoot Olympus, I can't actually use the Lightroom tethering, so I can't answer that. But is that something either one of you guys use?
I do not.
I've used it a little bit, but only with the K1 because it's the only one that's been supported.
Okay.
So I've never used it in an older version of Lightroom to be able to say one way or another if it's improved or not.
How was your experience with tethering the K1 on the current versions of it? Were there any problems?
I never had any problems, but I wasn't really sure what to expect. Like, my raw files are like 36 megs, so it's slow, so that's to be expected.
Yeah, there's going to be some lag there transmitting those.
Yeah. The other issue with tethering is there's so many levels of things to make tethering work. Right? You've got operating system level support of plugging that camera in.
Right.
They've got their SDKs that come out from the manufacturers, and then Lightroom on top of that. So there's multiple levels of things that can break and go wrong.
Right. It's kind of a recipe for problems.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I've watched, people always, the default answer is, well, just use Capture One. Just use Capture One.
Yeah, that's what people, yep.
I've watched people on Creative Live using Capture One.
Same problems?
Dies. And they're rebooting the camera, they're rebooting the computer. There's too many levels of things that can break and go wrong.
Yeah. The experience that I've had tethering that has worked, again, because I shoot Olympus, Lightroom doesn't, it's either Lightroom or Olympus, I'm not sure who, I think it would be Lightroom supporting it. But either way, like, Olympus cameras are not supported in tethering directly to Lightroom. Right. My experience that has worked quite well is I'm using my Olympus tethering software that came with the camera, and then I just set up Lightroom with a watched folder automatically imports them. And that has worked great for me every time I've tethered. And you've all seen it because when I do the live photo shoots here, or in the old studio when I was still doing them. We'll be back again with those. But anyway, that's something that's worked well. And if your experience with Lightroom has been such, then I would look into tethering with your manufacturer software and then using that watch folder feature with Lightroom to achieve that same result.
Yep.
All right. Thomas wants to know if we've ever tried Affinity. And Mark, I don't think you've ever used it, have you?
No.
Okay. How about you, Dave?
No, I never have.
Okay. No. I've used it a little bit. I think it's good software, and I'm happy that there are companies that are putting some pressure onto Adobe.
Oh, yeah.
Because that's good for all of us, regardless of what you choose. But I haven't used it enough to claim any experience with the software or anything beyond very basic. It's similar to Photoshop, and in my experience, it's been good. But I know it's not as capable as Photoshop because Photoshop's been developed for 20 plus years now.
Right.
Yeah, it just has the time in its favor.
Yeah, like I said, still, I think that as far as a cataloging application, there's not much that's better than Lightroom.
Mm-hmm.
Capture One is getting better with its cataloging feature.
I did not like their cataloging.
Well, they have two methodologies in Capture One. They have a session methodology and then a cataloging.
Mm-hmm.
And the cataloging is much better. I think it's version 10 or is it 11 now? I forget, but
I think it's 11.
It's definitely gotten much better. On One Raw 2018 is better. They used to only have like a browse module.
Okay.
Which was cool because you can't browse in Lightroom.
Right.
And I wish they'd do that, but you could only browse. But now they do have a feature where you can catalog certain folders. I'm really looking forward to what Skylum does with Luminar.
Mm-hmm.
They've put out some pretty grandiose statements about their asset management and that it's supposedly going to be able to open Lightroom catalogs.
Boy, if they can come out of the gate doing that, they're going to put some serious pressure on Adobe.
Yeah. And I do like their software.
Mm-hmm.
I do play around with their HDR software, Aurora.
Okay.
And I play around with Luminar.
Mm-hmm.
And they both have a very similar interface, which is nice. So if they can get the asset management going, it's a viable replacement for Lightroom.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Definitely. I actually just installed Raw Therapy on my computer just a couple of days ago, mainly because it apparently supports the Pentax, or does the multi frames and blends them together.
Oh, yeah.
So I installed it, but I haven't really played with it that much. But starting it up and quickly playing with it, it's slow and clunky as hell compared to Lightroom.
Yeah, those open source ones are usually user experience nightmares.
Yeah.
All right, so Andre said he very rarely goes to Photoshop. Jason said he uses Photoshop principally. Thomas says using Lightroom and Affinity, but no cloud stuff, so it must be like Lightroom 5 or 6. Travis says the more I learn Photoshop, the more I'm leaning towards it. And Peter says, I use Lightroom mostly, but I've used Photoshop since 1.1 and could never do without it. So you are like a veteran Photoshopper. Lightroom is just a gelded version of Photoshop. Yeah, I mean, that is true. Lightroom is Camera Raw with a different wrapper around it. But I think that wrapper serves its purpose very well.
Can you do catalog stuff in the Bridge? No.
Bridge is more of like just a folder management system, isn't it? It's not really...
I mean, Bridge is really designed around being able to look at all Adobe documents, Illustrator files and InDesign documents. It's a browser, so it's not really a catalog.
Right.
It does have a preview cache. It does have to build that just like Lightroom does.
Okay.
But the engine, the developing engine is identical.
Right.
Whatever you can edit in Lightroom, you can edit in Camera Raw.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, provided, I mean, if you're on a different version, it might not be the exact same version of Camera Raw that Photoshop has, but it's the same thing.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. Let's see. Steve says barely dabbled in Photoshop. So you really only use it to remove spots, dust, and crap on clothes. I'm in Lightroom almost all the time, but I really want to learn Photoshop. And Joe says, I bought Capture One Pro just for tethering and had said that tried Lightroom 5 tethering, it would crash most of the time. Okay, so
Yeah.
I mean, being on Capture One, maybe you're having a better experience, but if it was crashing all the time, then my recommendation would have been to try the manufacturer software. All right. I Love says, at first all I used was Lightroom, but with the subscription, I found them both useful and have found it necessary to help and helpful to learn Photoshop slowly but surely.
Right, that's basically the same with me.
Yeah. I got to say, I believe that Adobe, one of the smartest things Adobe ever did was the photography program.
Yeah, absolutely.
No brainer to me, because the minute I was able to subscribe to that program, I was on that. I was like, $10 a month? Give it to me. Give it to me now. Yeah, to me, it's absolutely a no-brainer. Thomas says that I had a video on some of the competitive apps as an alternative to Lightroom. I did do a comparison. In the video, I said it's not an in-depth comparison, but I looked at like On1, Luminar 2017 at the time, Capture One, a bunch of different ones, just to give people an overview, because a lot of people didn't like what was happening with Adobe Photoshop, with Lightroom CC and CC Classic, and the fact that the standalone version of Lightroom is in end of life. So that is a video on my channel if you're interested in an alternative and you want kind of an overview. I Love says Camera Raw is faster than Lightroom. It's debatable.
You're comparing apples to oranges, though. You're comparing just the develop engine of Lightroom, which is what Camera Raw is. And so you're opening an individual image in Camera Raw. So yeah, you do have to go through a process with Lightroom to get your images in first, but I wouldn't necessarily say that Camera Raw is faster, especially because the layout is so quirky to me. There's like things across the top and then there's a sidebar.
Drives me nuts.
Lightroom, it's one panel, top to bottom. So very intuitive, I think.
I would agree with that assessment. George has a question. I don't know how well we'll be able to answer this. So he says, with Lightroom, does computer configuration have a play in how tethering works, meaning higher-end graphics cards and processors?
I don't think so.
I would agree. I wouldn't think so.
It's literally
data transfer.
Your base level, USB connectivity on the computer, the SDK, the software development layer from the CAMI manufacturer that integrates with the operating system that talks to the software. So it's not processor or GPU dependent.
Right.
It's literally just connectivity and driver level stuff.
Right. I guess one thing is if your camera supports USB 3.0, make sure you're actually plugged into 3.0 when you're computer versus the 2.
Take advantage of that speed.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Jim says, anyone using On1 for editing? And Dave, I believe you've used On1 to some degree, haven't you?
Yeah, I've been testing it. I pretty much own every piece of photography software there is.
Got a nice hard drive collection?
I buy it all. I don't get anything for free.
Right.
So everything I have, I've purchased. I have it. I've been playing with it. I've had On1 for a long time. And I didn't, when it was kind of just a plug-in, it wasn't a standalone app like it is now. I didn't use it because it was kind of slow and clunky. It's way better than it used to be. And like I said, they do now have some cataloging built in. So they're definitely gunning for Adobe. I don't know about tethering. I don't know if they support that.
Right. Okay. All right. Peter says Luminar and Aurora are good software. They have a little way to go to maturity. That's probably fair. I mean, I think all software always has room for maturity.
Yeah, and these guys. From the backstory on this company, from what I've been told, it's now called Skylum. It was MacFun.
Yep.
And I believe originally some of the original developers or engineers that started MacFun came from Nick.
Okay.
When Google bought Nick, I believe some of these guys left and they started MacFun, and it was Mac. And I love some of the MacFun plugins, but they were Mac only. So Aurora was the first app that they had that was cross-platform, and now they've made Luminar cross-platform. And I think they've had a little bit of growing pains on the Windows side of things. I don't think it's been as smooth as they hoped, but they're pretty close in functionality now. But they definitely have some work to do on both sides.
Yeah, that's fair to say. I love the auto adjustment in Lightroom, like auto white balance in black point, as you can't do that with Camera Raw. I think you can with Camera Raw. I think it's just in that quirky left-hand side interface spot, so you don't know where it is.
Right.
Because I'm almost 100% sure you can do the white and the black point in Camera Raw.
Yeah.
All right, so George uses Lightroom CC and sometimes Photoshop. Thomas says, by the way, there is a Lightroom dashboard to help you figure out your most common photography habits. That's interesting.
Oh, I've not heard of that.
Yeah, I haven't heard of that either. That's very interesting. Let's see here. Bridge lets you see previews of the raw files. Yeah, I mean, that's what you're getting in Lightroom, too. I like DxO Lab too. I love says slam their subscription until I get 3 months free. Okay, so we have a question here. Chappie59 says the basic thing I want to know is how to learn the desktop version of Lightroom 6. Who can I learn it from to teach it? I think both Dave and I can do that for you. I have a Lightroom video course. What do you got available, Dave?
Yeah, I have a boot camp that I have that's not trying to remember what version that is. I'm actually working on updated classes on all of that.
Okay.
But there's really no difference in Lightroom 6 compared to the Lightroom Classic CC.
Yeah, just a few extra little features added here and there.
They're pretty identical as far as functionality.
All right, so I'm going to drop the link for my course in there. Dave, where's your course?
If you just go to davedoeppel.com, I've got links to everything there.
Okay, let me pop yours in here. Dave's http://davedoeppel.com. There we go. Okay, so you can check out both of those links, and if you are like either one of those courses, either mine or Dave's, one of us should be able to help you out there.
Yeah.
George has a question. What are everyone's thoughts on using presets in Lightroom? I'll let you guys start. Mark, what do you think?
Well, myself, I don't use presets. Well, I don't use any of the built-in presets, and I've never really bought any presets, but I've made my own presets. So basically, I for the most part, most of my basic development is the same. So once I basically get something set, then I can create the preset and just use it if I need to. But to be honest, even with me having my own, I rarely use it. Because I'm just so quick at it, I just whip through it and away I go. And even with presets, you tend to want to tweak them anyway, so you might as well just do it right from the get-go. Just do it from scratch.
Yeah, I kind of cringe. I see these ads pop up on Facebook all the time. You know, buy 20,000 Lightroom
oh my God,
presets.
Right? What on earth?
It's like, what can anybody possibly need 20,000 presets?
Yeah.
It's kind of crazy making.
The only, I I just never. I have a bunch that I've gotten over the years, and to me, I could see the benefit if somebody was, say, a wedding shooter, and they're shooting at a particular venue all the time, or multiple venues, and you know how your stuff looks at that venue. So when you're editing, you could create a preset for that venue, and it's going to preset all your stuff, and you synchronize it, and then you're using it for your own work. But the other stuff that you can buy, it's so, to me, the adjustments in Lightroom are so image dependent.
Yep.
That presets, I mean, they're maybe could be a great starting point.
Yeah,
but
that's
about it.
Starting point.
Yeah, I've never used presets. I bought one set of presets once because I was like, I need to see what all this fuss is about and see if these things are even useful. And I was like, number one, I think it was something like 100 presets, and I was like, this is ridiculous. This is just there's too many here. And I very quickly realized like they're not useful at all because of exactly what you said, Dave. Like, it's image dependent. All these photographers that are selling presets, you know, I don't want to say they're ripping people off, because if people find those sorts of presets useful, that's fine. I'm not going to knock somebody else for using
lots
them.
of people do use them. So
right. But to me, like, a preset is a great way to copy somebody else's look. And if you are trying to create your own look and your own style as a photographer, then using somebody else's preset on your work, to me, is just doing yourself a disservice, because it's not your look, it's somebody else's look applied to your photo.
Yeah, and if you
the other thing that you'll find that I've seen a lot is the presets that you can buy from people in various places aren't really created very well. For example, if you create a preset that's doing anything in the basic section, it's going to be a horrible preset.
Yeah.
Because that is going to be very individual for every single image for the most part. Everything below that, you know, you get into clarity and saturation or tone curves, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, you could do some kind of cool creative stuff down in there. But if you ever get a preset and it's adjusting exposure or highlights or shadows, it's going to be terrible.
Yeah.
What were you going to say before, Mark?
I don't remember now. Must have been a lie.
All right, we have some of that echoing in the chat. Like, creating our own presets is useful, and I agree with that. But you know, not buying them isn't very useful. I think we're all pretty well of the same opinion on that.
Yeah.
All right, so let's get into some of these other questions that we've gotten. This is one that I wanted to tackle, and I know Tim's here, so we're gonna start with this one, if you guys don't mind, which is bringing photos from different Lightroom catalogs together, integrating things together. So this is a situation where we had a computer that we were working on, and then we switched to a new computer, but didn't bring the entire catalog over, and now there's two different catalogs with two different image sets. And I'm going to show you guys how you can manage to bring those together. So let me switch it over so you guys can see my screen here. And what I've got here is my Lightroom open. Now I'm actually going to close this because this is my main catalog. And I'm going to open new catalogs that I created to demonstrate this. So I have two catalog sets here, WW01 and WW02. And I'm just going to open this up. And it's not a huge set of images, but the principle of how this works is what's important. And I don't want to bog this down with a huge process. So I've got this catalog. And in this catalog, I have this folder that is layered here with these images in it, right? And I have that other catalog here, this WW02. So we'll pretend this is the catalog from the other computer. And part of what's happening here is in this folder, there's actually some of the same images. There we go, trying to click through. In here, like this folder here has images that are duplicated in that other catalog. And when you have two separate catalogs, The process is actually really, really easy to deal with. All you need to do is open whichever catalog you want to be like your main or principal catalog. And so, in Tim's case, this would be on the computer that you're working with. Like, this is the regular catalog you open every time you go to Lightroom to import, to edit, to export, and all those sorts of things. And what you're going to do is you're going to go under File, and you're going to import from another catalog. And so in order to do this, you need the catalog file of the other Lightroom instance, and you need all of the folders with all of the photos as part of that catalog. And when you do this, it's going to bring up the browser, and you're going to find that catalog. I want WW02, and you select the catalog file. You don't select the photos. You don't select a folder. You select the catalog file. And what this allows Lightroom to do, this goes back to what Dave was saying earlier, Lightroom manages everything in this catalog file, which is just a database. And Adobe Lightroom is going to read this database, and it's going to say, okay, there's 2 folders here. I have this set of images is not in this current catalog that is open, but look at this. This Michaela Wallace folder is already in here, so these images are unchecked. It's detecting the duplicates for me. You choose how to handle the photos. This is important. Do you want to copy them to a new location? Do you want to add new photos without moving? And I would actually ask you, Dave, how you would do this. Here's how I tend to do this when I'm merging 2 catalogs, just because I like to keep my organization the way I like it. I usually leave them in place and add them to the catalog, and then manually move the folders where I want them in my hierarchy, rather than letting Lightroom copy and move the folders and the files itself.
So, well, you're moving them within Lightroom after the fact?
That's correct. I import them, leaving them in place, and then I move the folders where I want them in my organizational scheme after they've been imported.
Yeah, I don't ever actually end up in this scenario because
Okay.
I keep everything in one catalog, and I keep everything under one top level folder.
Right.
But if I was it doesn't really matter at which point you do this moving. Mm-hmm. Whether you tell it to go ahead and move them to a new location at this point, or you do it after the fact. It's still basically doing the same process.
Right.
At the file system level. So,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I would tend to do. I'm not a big fan of using the move command at all. Mm-hmm. Whether it's in Lightroom or in on Windows in Explorer or in Finder on the Mac. Mm-hmm. Because doing the move command, it's going to take it from one location and move it to another.
Right.
If anything happens in between, especially if you're dealing with external drives, mm-hmm. you could. That's where people end up getting in trouble with corrupted files and things. So I always like to do a copy. Mm-hmm. Then I verify that it's been copied and everything's accurate. Then I get rid of the original.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And this is something that's super important to understand when you're doing a thing like this. Is you have to consider how your brain works in your own style of workflow, because I wouldn't do it that way, because right. I can guarantee you if I did that, I would end up with duplicate files littered all over my computer and hard drives, and it would turn into an absolute travesty. Yeah. And so because of me and my brain and how I work and do things organizationally, I would choose, and I'm going, like in this particular case, I'm going to choose not to do that. But like I absolutely understand why you're saying what you're saying there with the data integrity. Right. That makes a lot of sense. And that's actually something I'd not thought of in terms of like a move action.
Yeah, move. And I say that from experience, because the only time, and this wasn't when I was doing anything professionally, this was just mm-hmm. like I was moving a bunch of files from one drive to another drive, and I was doing a move, and mm-hmm. the machine crashed in the middle, and I ended up with like the external drive got corrupted, half of the stuff had already been moved, and it ended up being just a giant mess. And so
a mess of a different sort.
But I do move things within Lightroom now if it's just small amounts of things that I'm moving around. It's fairly safe. I just try to avoid it if possible.
Okay, understand. So in this particular instance, to get back to the merging of the catalogs, I'm going to leave it as this: add new photos to the catalog without moving.
Right.
And when you click import, you can see now that these photos have been added to the catalog. It happened really fast, so you didn't really see it. But the catalogs now have been merged. And if I go back here, now if I look...
Is it actually
I have this second...
Or is it moving the ones from one catalog into the other catalog?
What's that?
Is it actually merging the two catalogs, or is it taking the photos from the one catalog and putting them in the other one, in the new one?
Because of what I did and what I just expanded here, you can see I have two picture folders with two folder hierarchies. And this is what I was talking about before. So these are the photos that were just added from the old catalog. And again, I choose to do this because normally I'm not doing it in this particular fashion. The other reason I tend to do it the way I do it is when I have a catalog I want to merge in is typically when I've been, like, I didn't end up doing this in Vegas, but I usually have my laptop with me when I travel and shoot, and I might import my photos onto my laptop and do some editing there. And if I do that, then I want to maintain those edits and everything. And what I find it easier to do is just take that whole set of images, export the catalog, and throw it on an external drive, and then import that into Lightroom on my main computer here.
Right.
I have my data backup on the hard drive on the MacBook, which helps me with the integrity part. But I also don't have it into this sort of Byzantine structure. In that case, it's just in a single folder. But either way, what I would then do is just take this folder here, which is where the images are, and just drag it down into this old hierarchy, and then remove this folder here.
Right.
And now I've got a single integrated catalog. And if I go now to my Finder and we look at the desktop, you can see this WW01 has its catalog, has the pictures, and everything is in there that I wanted in there, including the Real Breaking Nate ones that I needed to add. And if I go into WW02, the catalog is still there because it takes that information and incorporates it into the catalog, your main catalog. But if we go into here, you'll see that the pictures are now gone. See, these Michaela Wallace ones are still there because those were the duplicates, but the other ones are gone because I moved them inside of Lightroom.
Yep.
So once you're at that point, you can then delete that, and you've got your main catalog with everything integrated together. So that's how you would do that. If anybody, Tim or anybody else, has questions on how this would work, let us know, and we'll be happy to clarify. Peter had a question for you, Dave. Says, is there a limit in terms of number of photographs for the Lightroom catalog?
So yeah, I don't think they've ever actually published an actual finite limit. But what you have to remember is the underlying engine of Lightroom is a database. It actually runs on a database called SQLite. And so it's just a number of records. But where you run into trouble and where I think people will get into slowness is with the previews, because the preview file itself is going to get gigantic. And there are settings within Lightroom for kind of clearing out, especially the one-to-one previews, which was one of the things I was going to talk about. And we can look at, if you want, I can jump over to my screen.
Okay, I'll switch it over for you.
And so, and like I said, I keep everything under one top level folder, and then I'm organizing all my stuff by a year. So I let Lightroom kind of do its own auto naming of the folders.
Okay.
When I do my import. And kind of the reason I do this is because I do bounce between two computers. And so I will synchronize an external drive, and then I'll take that to my other machine, and then typically what happens at that point is this top level folder becomes missing. So instead of having to go find a whole bunch of folders, I only have to find one, and then it's instantly reconnected to my photos. So, but what they have now, I used to teach the import process of, let me bring up my import dialog here. So what I used to do up until recently was I always copied as DNG file because they're typically a little bit smaller and they'll hold metadata within the file. But Adobe, as of Lightroom 7 or Lightroom Classic CC, they now have the embedded in sidecar preview function, which didn't used to really do anything. Now, this pulls the embedded JPEG out of your RAW file and uses it as the preview, so Lightroom doesn't have to generate a preview. Because Lightroom, remember, Lightroom's a database. It's indexing the location of your RAW file and then keeping track of everything you do to it. So when they come in, it has to generate a preview to show you what your image looks like. And then if you jump into any editing or applying presets, it has to regenerate that preview. So now we have embedded in sidecar. And so this is my kind of my default. And so this is the file handling. So I'm doing embedded in sidecar. I'm not importing duplicates, and I'm making a second copy to a RAW folder, which is just my original RAW file. That's like my kind of emergency backup, instant backup of my RAW files. I don't do any renaming. I don't apply develop presets when I import, because with the new embedded workflow, if you do anything like that, then Lightroom has to generate a preview. So I don't do any develop. I do add my copyright metadata, and then my default import organization is to this top level folder that I had named DNG because I used to convert. The reason I'm no longer converting is because of the embedded preview workflow, because it's going to pull the preview out of the RAW file.
So that saves a lot of time.
Well, no, but if you convert to DNG, then it kind of breaks that whole process.
Right.
Because now it's going to convert to DNG, and it's going to have to generate a preview. So I'm not converting. I'm leaving them as RAW files. So it's embedded in sidecar, no preset, and then it's going into a dated folder automatically by the default settings.
Okay.
So what that does, and you'll see it more, so if you're used to importing into Lightroom, and maybe you've done black and white profile on your camera, so because you want to see what it looks like in black and white, so you're shooting in that mode. When you bring those images into Lightroom, they will start out as black and white, but then all of a sudden they pop into color. So this no longer does that. And you can tell because I shot some infrared images here. And when we look at that, you can see down here in the bottom, it's saying it's still the embedded preview. So if I were to make any develop adjustments to this image, even a quick develop, let's say I just did something with exposure, the embedded preview is now gone.
Right.
It's now generated its own preview, which is an infrared file. And so that's why I think somebody mentioned in the chat that they apply a preset on import.
Okay.
So if you want to get the fastest possible imports into Lightroom, you just do a copy. You do embedded in sidecar, and then you don't apply any presets.
Okay.
And that gives you the ability to be in the library module, zoomed in at 100% without waiting for the preview to render.
To generate, yeah.
And now I can just rip through these images without waiting.
Mm-hmm. That's pretty cool.
Which is one of the things that people have been complaining about for a long time in Lightroom. I'll jump back on the screen here. A lot of people, especially people that did weddings, and even specifically people that did weddings that were doing same-day slideshows, trying to do that with Lightroom was a nightmare. You had to make sure you shot like small JPEG and then only pull those JPEGs into Lightroom, and then still had to generate previews. So a lot of people went to using Photo Mechanic, because Photo Mechanic would read the internal JPEG in your RAW file very fast. You could zoom in and out, and then you still had to bring it into Lightroom though. So it was only good for like doing initial selections. So now with the embedded workflow, you don't have to go to another application.
Okay, excellent. So we've got a question from Tom. He says, I've heard that Lightroom gives you less. This is something that has always kind of bugged me about the Lightroom versus Capture One debate. They're saying, Tom says, I've heard that Lightroom gives you less of a RAW file to work with out of camera than, say, Capture One. And he wants to know, is this true?
No, a RAW file is a RAW file.
Exactly.
Yeah,
It's more how the software handles and processes the RAW file.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing I've ever seen, at one point people were saying that they thought converting to DNG was throwing away some kind of metadata. I've never seen actual proof of that happening. The biggest difference is the camera profiles in Lightroom. Capture One's RAW conversion gives, I think, out of the box, a more accurate rendering of what your image looked like in camera compared to the Lightroom profiles. But it's very easy to tweak Lightroom and create a default profile that gives your RAW file the look that you want.
I've heard to what Mark said about like how the software handles or processes that RAW file. I've heard people say that they prefer how Capture One makes their RAW files look as compared to Lightroom. But I think that's getting into opinion land versus, anything.
That's probably the initial preview. Is different from one to the others.
I think it's less preview though. They're saying like after they've done all of their raw edits, they prefer the look better versus Lightroom. It can pull out, sometimes they say it can pull out more dynamic range. I find that hard to believe because that's whatever's in the raw file.
Right.
It is a lot of just personal preference.
Yeah.
It's very subjective. Like I said, you've got, by default in Lightroom, the camera profile is set to, I think, Adobe standard. And you can drop it down and select like whatever, like you might have it in your camera. Like I shoot Canon, so I've got, portrait, landscape, whatever. So you can select those, but you can also generate your own defaults for that. And every time you import, have that applied. So it's just a little bit more work on the Lightroom side. A lot of people are looking at that compressed JPEG preview on their camera, and that's what they expect to see in Lightroom. And Lightroom, the Adobe standard profile just doesn't do that. It's very flat.
It's typically flat.
Yeah. Which yeah, it's something that I've talked about in a lot of videos and answered as a question when people are like, why doesn't my my image look like it did on the camera? It's because you're coming in as that flat profile, which in general is ideal when it comes to editing your raw file, because at that flat point you've essentially got your canvas to edit the image to make it look the way you want it to look.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So, did Steve had a question that we didn't? Oh, here we go. I probably missed it, but what does Dave shoot with? Actually, we didn't. We didn't say. Dave, do you want to share what you do shoot with?
Yeah, I'm a Canon shooter, so I shoot with my main camera right now is a 5D Mark III, and my EOS M5 mirrorless.
How do you like that?
I love it.
Yeah?
I love this camera. I also have the original EOS M, which is my infrared. That was my infrared conversion.
Okay.
So all my infrared stuff I shot with that camera. In fact, I've had one of my IPC print comp awards, was it last 2015? Was shot with that EOS M infrared. So
that's really cool.
I like the M5 better than the M. So the nice thing is the M5 now has a shutter release port.
Oh,
so
very nice.
The other ones don't. Although I did find I found a intervalometer that uses the infrared control, so I can actually do time lapse using that on my EOS M.
Okay.
So
I popped Magic Lantern on when I wanted to do that.
Oh, yeah.
I know.
I've toyed with that, and
it's not something that I care to use. I mean, I don't shoot Canon anymore anyway, so it doesn't matter. But it's not something I liked using regularly.
Yeah, but that's why I like the 5, because it's the only downside to the 5 is the
flipping screen.
The screen flips down from the bottom. So when you're on a tripod, if you're trying to use it for vlogging, it sucks.
I can't.
M3 went to the top.
Right. Everyone's different.
Which is crazy. And now the M50 finally goes out to the side.
I don't know what you guys think, but I do not understand why any camera that has a flip-out screen doesn't have a fully articulating. In my opinion, that's the only way to go. All of these half measures to me are just stupid and useless. All right. So let's see. Did we have any questions here in the chat? Thomas is saying, I'm not sure. There may be some proprietary metadata information the manufacturer uses in the raw files that you will most likely lose when you convert to DNG. That was the argument that was floating around for a while. Okay. I don't know that would be true, though, because as my understanding, DNG was essentially just a container file that they stuffed the original raw file into.
No, it's a conversion.
It is
but there is an option to also embed the original raw file, which is just going to make a larger file. So
right.
Yeah.
At that point, it's kind of pointless. But yeah, that's the argument people were saying. To be honest, if you want the best raw conversion for whatever camera you're using, you want to use the manufacturer's raw converter.
Have fun with that.
Right. But I mean, if you want the best conversion for Canon, you want to use their Canon software to do the conversion, but it's horrible software.
Yeah, it's almost. I mean, I don't know if any manufacturer has managed to make not horrible raw conversion software.
Yeah, but it will absolutely convert your image better than anything else.
Yeah, it'd be like using raw therapy to do it.
It's just unbearably horrible software to use.
Right. All right, so I see TC is here, so let's answer TC's question. This one is in opinion land, though, so you have to take that with a measure here, because TC says, I'm learning On1 Photo Raw 2018, and my question is, should I switch from using Lightroom to On1 Photo Raw? And
I would think it's either one or the other.
I mean, number one, it's not really an either or. It doesn't have to be an either or, kind of like when we were talking about Lightroom and Photoshop. But if you want one, in my opinion, no, you should keep using Lightroom.
Well, I guess the other question is he using On1 on its own, or is he using the Lightroom
He's saying switch.
plugin?
Switch from using
Yeah.
Lightroom to On1. And as an opinion, I would say no. I would say stick with Lightroom.
Yeah.
That's my opinion.
My personal opinion would be at this point to stick with Lightroom. However, I will say that at this point in time, you easily could just move to On1 Raw and only use On1 Raw. Mm-hmm. I think the previous version, On1 Raw 2017, probably not. But I think with the new 2018 and the new release that just came out, it's probably has more ability to be your only program.
Yeah, I've read mixed reviews about the newest version. Just not quite being there, but definitely better than the previous version was.
Yeah.
Yeah. The reality of the answer, and of course, TC acknowledged that it's opinion, and he recognizes that. But this is something that you guys have heard me say over and over and over again. The reality of it is you need to choose the tool that works for you. So, like you've used Lightroom. TC just said, I've used Lightroom since version 4. You're learning On1. If you find On1 to be the better tool for you, whether that's in the results you get, in creating a workflow that you prefer, or purely out of enjoyment of using that better more than Lightroom, then yeah, you should switch to On1. You shouldn't switch to On1 just because there may be this right, like because Adobe is pushing further and further into the subscription model, and because people are resistant to that, which I understand. I again, like I said earlier, I'm happy to give Adobe $10 a month in perpetuity for the most up-to-date versions of Lightroom and Photoshop, and I expect and I know that at some point that price will go up, and when it does, I'm still going to be happy to pay it, but. You shouldn't jump off of Adobe just because people are bashing Adobe for whatever reason.
Right.
If you find a particular tool to be better for you, then yes, you should absolutely switch to that tool, whatever it is. But if not, don't. But it is good to explore your options too. I'm not saying don't look at options. I'm not saying don't. Like Dave, I mean, you said you've got basically every piece of raw processing software that's available out there, but you're still using Lightroom as your principal processor, aren't you?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think, and one of the things, and I talk about this a lot, is in the library module in Lightroom, using survey mode to
I love survey mode. Oh my God, I love survey mode.
There's nothing faster. There's nothing faster than culling in survey mode in Lightroom. Even with all the other issues with Lightroom performance, culling, if you learn a few keystrokes, and my website, I have a Lightroom little cheat sheet thing right on the front page of my website that you can get, and I have the keystrokes in it. If you learn those keystrokes, there's nothing faster, especially with the embedded workflow now where you can pull your images in really fast and use the embedded previews to zoom in and out, check your, I'm a Canon shooter, I have to check focus. I have to check focus on every image. And I admit that, and I understand it. But there's nothing faster. So I do know that the latest version of Alien Skin Exposure X3
just released it, didn't they?
They just released an update. I haven't installed it yet, but it supposedly has a mode that will let you do comparisons on 6 images. So that may be something to look at.
But with Lightroom, you can do more than 6. You can do 10, 12, 20.
You could do
in survey mode.
And especially if you're shooting, like if you're shooting portraits.
I use survey mode constantly for that.
Pull up survey mode. You're looking at 8, 10, 12 images that are similar, picking your best ones.
Yep.
You know, where anything else, photo mechanic, or I think even on one, you know, when you're culling, you're going image by image by image by image. And that's slow.
Yeah, yeah. So TC says, I found it not to be better. And that kind of is the answer right there for yourself. If you're not finding it to be better than Lightroom, then, you know, then it's not the better tool for you. The other thing to consider when you think about making a switch like this is the opportunity cost in disrupting your workflow. And if it's something that you do as, you know, a hobby, or you know, whatever, I should switch this back, you know, just for fun, and it's not important to you to be as efficient as you can be in terms of your workflow and things like that, this isn't such a big deal. But if you're somebody who cares about the time you spend in front of your computer managing and wrangling and editing those files, there's a huge hit to you when you make a switch from software that you are familiar with and efficient in to a new piece of software that you're going to have to learn and reprogram your brain to become comfortable with to get you to that same place. If it is a better tool, that cost may be worth it, and there's nothing wrong with that. But that's something you have to think about when you think about switching. Part of the reason I haven't used Affinity Photo hardly at all is because of that cost and time and effort. I want to see how good a piece of software it is, but when I look at my editing backlog, I'm like, fuck, I don't have time.
Exactly.
Don't have time. And that's just what it is. So Jason was giving me a hard time. He said Premiere Pro versus Final Cut Pro, which was a little sort of like whiny, you know, self-deprecating rant that I went on a while back when I was thinking about switching to PC. But let's keep it to Lightroom tonight, since that's our topic of the night. And so, Mark, you wanted to show folks some white balancing tips, didn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, all right. So I'm going to switch it over so that you can see Mark's screen, and he's going to switch it over so you can see his screen, and we're going to learn a little bit here about white balance. And again, if you have any kind of question regarding Lightroom, feel free to drop it in the chat. That's what we're here for. We also have the questions that we took earlier this week from folks who wanted to learn some stuff here. So whenever you're ready, Mark.
Yeah, I'm just switching screens here.
Awesome.
So that way I can actually see what I'm doing.
So Thomas says, I used to use Photoshop and now I use Affinity Photo because of the cost and the fact that I do not need it for anything major. And like that's exactly it. Like, you look at the situation, you make an assessment, and you choose the thing that works for you. And Affinity's working for Thomas, and that's great. Like, he's not here tonight, but I think Vincent, who's usually with us on the show, he's been using Affinity for quite a while as well and been very happy with it. So check out the tools, think about the cost to you, and make an informed decision for yourself. All right, it's all you, Mark.
Okay, so basically, sometimes if you're shooting, like portrait specifically in this case, is like if you can see on my screen here, my white balance is set to auto, and it looks horrendous. I could probably tweak things here and get close, but a nice trick I like to use with portraits to help get me closer is to zoom in right on the eyes, take the eyedropper tool, and then usually just click on the whites of the eyes, and that'll get me pretty close. And myself, what I tend to do is when I actually get there, I actually tend to warm it up just a little bit. I like my pictures a little bit warmer. And so that's sort of a quick tip to get your white balance close if you don't have any way to get anything else white to get your white balance close to where you want it.
Right. Look them in the whites of the eyes.
That's right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and Jason just said, "Oh, I never thought of using the whites of the eyes." It's a really good tip.
Yeah, because in this image here, there's not really anything else that's white. Like her necklace a little bit, but it's not really sharp compared to her eyes. So, and the eyes are what you're supposed to focus on, so they should be sharp.
Right. So
you can sometimes use the teeth, but people tend to have yellow teeth sometimes. So.
Okay. Yeah, that's true. Like the teeth are more likely to go yellow, so that's not necessarily going to be a good good point for that as a sampling point. So Thomas said no gray cards or similar tools. That's something you could absolutely use as well. A gray card, a white card, a black card. And
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, quick point. I've been meaning to make a video about this, but I just want to throw this out there because I find this amusing. So I did a video a while back on how to get accurate white balance by using a gray card, and I specifically did a gray card because gray cards are very common, very easy to find. Most people are familiar with them in photography, and I cannot tell you how many comments I keep getting from people who are telling me that you can't use a gray card for white balance, that you got to use a white card. And the point isn't that it's white or gray or black or anything else. The point is that it's a neutral tone.
Yeah, neutral tone, exactly.
Yeah, it's got to be a neutral tone. That's what's important. An 18% gray card, which you traditionally do use for gauging exposure, is also great for a white balance reference because if it's a properly made gray card, it's going to be a neutral tone. Mm-hmm. So, I love says just don't use the brown eye to white balance.
Yeah.
Oh, God. Oh, my God. Okay. So, we had a question from PTEX. I'm not sure if PTEX is here tonight, but sent me a question. And, Dave, maybe you have some insight on this.
Okay.
That being that there seemed to be a problem in exporting and the noise and the sharpening. So I'm trying to find the original question on Facebook here real quick. But he also sent us some files. I'm going to throw them in the drive so that you guys can take a look at them. But gosh darn it. In the meantime, Dave, if you want to share anything, I'll just flip it over to you and you can show some folks a quick tip here. I wanted to get this ready before the show, but I was running a little bit tight. Okay, I'm trying. I got to find the comment.
So he was saying he was getting his exports were noisy.
Yeah, there was a noise problem with his exports, and that what he was seeing in the exported image was not matching what he was seeing inside of Lightroom. And let me just look at the email and see what it says. So here are the files and a couple of screenshots. This was just a quick promo shot for my local bar. It's just silly posted on Facebook. I rarely use the denoise functions, as like you I enjoy a bit of grain. In this case I was experimenting, but I kind of expected Lightroom to do as told, which it has not. But I think I might see what the problem is here, and it may just be actually the level of processing that's happening on the image. So I think the easiest way to do this is going to be to open it up on my main screen, and I'll switch it over so that you guys can see it. So let me bring this up. So, here's a question from Tom while I'm getting this sorted out. Tom wants to know what we use to color calibrate our monitors. So I'll let you guys go while I get this up here on screen so that we can discuss what's happening here.
Yeah, I'm still using a Spyder Pro 4.
Oh, you're ahead of me. I'm using the Pro 3.
I'm also on the, I'm not using the Pro, I was using the Express, but the Spyder 4. The colorimeter is the same, I just only needed it for one monitor.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me get this switched over and you guys can take a look and we can see what we're talking about here. So what we've got here is a couple of screenshots that were sent. And I think the issue is the level of processing that's happening, because what we're comparing here is an unprocessed image and then a processed image on export. And that's where you're going to see a difference, because if you're comparing your processed image in Lightroom to your processed image out of Lightroom after an export, they're going to be not exactly identical, because generally speaking, you're exporting a JPEG, and when you export a JPEG, there's a bit of compression applied to it.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, you're going to be looking at something that's, for the most part, to the naked eye, identical. Like if you pixel peep, you'll see the differences.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, but here we're looking at I don't know if there's any processing applied to the before on the left, but as a before, that would indicate to me that this is the straight out of the camera raw file, and then on the right we have the processed image, which he processed this way for fun, messing around. We've got really cool, wild, crazy colors and whatnot. And when you push an image like that up to an extreme, you're gonna get a different result as compared to your unprocessed raw file.
Yeah, I'd like to see the original histogram too.
Because he sent me the actual raw file, so let me download it.
If that original histogram is really pushed over to the left and he's trying to bring that up, you're inherently going to bring in a lot of noise.
Yeah.
And when he's exporting, I wonder if he has the quality rate up at 10 as well, too.
Yep, here we go. If you look at the histogram here, we're way off into the left, so this is a pretty underexposed
not necessarily underexposed, but
right.
But the way raw files get written, those blacks and shadow areas is a smaller amount of data in the file.
Right.
So if you're exposing for that left-hand side for those shadows, but then later you try to bring those up, there's not enough data, and so you're going to get a ton of noise.
Right.
If you would have pushed this up a little bit more to get those blacks more up into shadow area and the shadows up into that mid-tone, then you can bring them down, and you're not going to have as much noise in it. So I think it's probably a combination of starting out a little too low on exposure and then trying to push that up with processing.
Yeah, and typically the higher the ISO too, the more you push it, the worse the grain's going to get as well too.
Yeah, I'm trying to find. I still can't find the original comment, but I think we're looking at just trying to compare apples to oranges here, essentially, because of the processed version versus the unprocessed, and what that's going to do to your image.
Yeah, and there's a lot of local adjustments going on with all that colorization, and there's a lot of stuff going on there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. Ooh, I think I may have found it. Okay, here we go. So I found that recently Lightroom seems to be exporting JPEGs and Photoshop files, completely ignoring the noise reduction. I like a bit of noise, but if I decide I want to smooth things a bit, Lightroom is not listening. I don't export with any sharpening. That is the most common solution. Just a straight 100% quality, no resizing. Makes no difference which file format I choose. So it looks like he's looking for a little bit of that noise reduction, but he's not getting it. And so that would be what we're talking about then, is just that you're pushing the data pretty far, so it's hard to get any noise reduction out of that.
It would still, I think there's probably more of an underlying issue with, it could be any number of things. I don't know operating system or exact version he's using. But typically I've seen when things don't work at all like that there's some other system level problem, whether it's graphics driver or just the software needs to get reinstalled. And he said it's happening on both Lightroom and Photoshop.
Right.
So I would think there's some other underlying issue somewhere else.
Yeah, and I'll maybe see if I can't get more info from him and see if we can't get a better answer. But based on what we know, that's kind of what we're coming up with here.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely, I could see how this image is inherently going to have noise in it with the process.
Right.
But if it's not doing anything at all, I would think there's some other issue.
All right, so we do have a question from Mr. Noodle, who's wondering if you'd use HDR on this image, and that's something you certainly could do, but you'd want to think about that ahead of time, because then you'd want to shoot the bracket of exposures to have those available. You can, in theory, create some virtual files and do a single frame, HDR, but you're still going to run into the same problems when you're taking a file like this particular one and you're pushing the data.
Yeah. If
like
you'd
that.
started out with a more even exposure up in the midtones, it would have been easier to create a virtual copy that's a stop lower and a virtual copy that's a stop higher. But
Right.
since that's already kind of pushed down into the low area, it's going to be pretty hard.
Yeah, pushing's never good. Some camera sensors can handle it better than others, but still pushing is pushing.
Right. When you're stretching data, you're stretching data no matter what you're working with.
Right.
All right. Back to the questions here. I keep grabbing the wrong mouse. I got two different computers here. This is one of the things I got to try to figure out. Oh, I know. There was another thing that I wanted to share based on a question that we had gotten from Johnny about, and maybe there's a different, well, no, I don't think there would be a different way to handle this, but this would be using smart previews to edit your offline files. That embedded doesn't help with that, does it? Because to actually work offline, you need that actual smart preview, right?
Yeah, you've got to have smart previews, and that is an option in preferences to do that.
All right, I'll flip it over if you want to walk through that, Dave.
Yeah.
All righty.
Let me.
Yeah, and this is. Go ahead, Mark.
Much, but yeah, I'm just saying I haven't used smart previews that much for offline editing, but I have a little bit. But you are still limited to what you can do, because if I remember right, I think when you're doing the offline, I still don't think you can bring it into Photoshop to work because it's not really there.
No, you can't.
Right, you're limited to Lightroom. You can do anything and everything in the Lightroom develop module,
right?
But like you can't take it to Photoshop because you are offline.
Yeah, because it basically, smart previews are a compressed, lossy DNG file, and somewhere around 2,000 pixels on the long edge. So we used to have to trick Lightroom to do this, but now in Lightroom, under the Performance tab, we have, where's it at? Use smart previews instead of originals for image editing. And if you do that, it tells you right here, this will allow increased performance, but may display decreased quality while editing. And then final output will remain full size. So the way we used to trick that was we'd create smart previews, and then we'd rename the folder where the photos live. So Lightroom would say, oh, we don't have them, we're going to use smart previews. And that's, for somebody that's new to Lightroom, that's very messy and scary.
Yeah.
So now all you have to do is check this box, and it'll use the smart previews in the develop module. You just have to remember, like, zooming in, you may not have quite the same quality because it's looking at that compressed DNG file. But smart previews is a good way of moving things around if you only need to work in Lightroom. You can even export, and since it's about 2,000 pixels on the long edge, roughly, you can export for web.
Yep.
Or Facebook or Instagram or whatever. So again, it's in preferences, performance, and a lot of times too, and this could have something to do with that noise problem as well. Sometimes there are issues with the graphics processor.
Okay.
I see more issues on the PC side because PCs are definitely more susceptible to having graphic driver issues, and there's frequent updates. So something he may try is to turn this off and do his export and see if it makes any difference.
Okay.
But again, to get the maximum performance, you would turn this on, which then when you're in the develop module, it's only going to use the smart previews, and your develop module should be much faster. I don't leave it on because I'm not doing massive quantities of stuff, and so I'm not that concerned with that.
Okay.
But that is the checkbox. But there was something else I was going to show. Down at the bottom here, this has to do with the embedded preview. And what this will do is if you turn this on, Lightroom will start in the background, start generating its own previews, even if you selected the embedded preview.
Oh, that's nice.
So I leave that off because I don't want it to do that. I'll worry about previews once I get into developing.
Mm-hmm. So TC has a question related to that, saying, isn't smart previews mainly for working on your files when you're away from your main drive where the files are stored?
That was the original purpose of smart previews, which came out in Lightroom 5, was to be able to, and if anybody that outsources, anybody that sends their editing off to one of the outsource companies, that's how most of them work. You send them your Lightroom catalog and the smart previews because it's a lot smaller than sending the raw images. Mm-hmm. And so what they do the edits, and then they just send you back the catalog. And then like you showed earlier, you do an import from catalog. It already knows your images are already there, so it's just going to import the edit changes.
Right.
So it's very fast, but there's no ability to go to Photoshop with that.
Right. All right. Now, one of the things that you will want to know is how to generate those previews if you don't have them automatically generated. Yeah, and I've got this open here so I can show that. There's two ways to do it. Number one, if you are going to use smart previews on the regular, goes back to the import dialog where Dave was earlier. And under the import dialog, under file handling, you have these build preview options. And what Dave was saying earlier is he's using the embedded in Sidecar because that pulls that JPEG out of that raw file and gives you an instantaneous preview. But if you specifically need the smart preview because you edit offline, then when you import your images, you can have it generate a smart preview on import. You can choose a minimal smart preview, which is going to be less. I don't remember the sizes, but that's going to be less than like that about 2,000 that you said it was.
No, it's actually right below this. There's a separate checkbox for the smart previews. So the previews.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no, I know it's confusing.
It
confuses everybody. One-to-one previews will actually build a Lightroom preview that's like you can zoom into 100% and view it. So that's just the viewing previews. But smart previews is right below that.
Yeah, I totally missed that. Thank you for catching that. So yeah, you can still do it on import, but just don't worry about what I was talking about.
Yeah.
You'd want to check this option right here to build smart previews, and then that will do it on import. Now, if you have, say, a whole catalog of images and you've never built smart previews before and you want to take these to an offline drive, then you have to generate smart previews for these images that are in your catalog. That's also fairly easy to do. One thing to understand is that this is something that takes time because Lightroom has to process this. So like if I wanted to generate smart previews for all of the images in this catalog, I'm going to go to the top level folder, whatever it is. One thing, this normally is the default option, but if not, because it may not be with your system, in order to make sure you get all of the images underneath that top level folder, you'd want to come up to this little plus sign right here and make sure that show photos in subfolders is checked. Because what that does, if I uncheck it, you'll see no pictures are now being shown because alongside here I've got pictures as the top level folder. There are 0 photos in that folder. They're all down here in these subfolders. If I go to this one for Michaela here, you can see the Michaela images. But if I go back up to pictures and I check show photos and subfolders, now you can see all of the images in all of these folders underneath. Now, if I want...
There's one more shortcut to that, too.
Go ahead.
If you go up above to the catalog panel and open that up, you can just click on all photographs.
Ah, look at that.
Well,
I almost never use the catalog panel. I always have it collapsed.
I know.
Great tip. Thank you, Dave. So all photographs right here. That may be the better way to go about it. Either way, you want to make sure that you have access to your entire set of images. And then you're going to select all of those images. Whoops. Wrong keyboard that time. And okay, where is it, Dave? I don't remember. It's been a while since I've done it.
Library
preview.
There we go. Yeah, you're going to go into library previews and then build smart previews. And when you do that, you're going to see the progress bar up along the top here start working. It's building these smart previews. After this is done, I can take these images offline and still have access to and edit the smart previews. So this is something that people who use laptops as their primary computing platforms for working in Lightroom can find useful. And that's why I was talking to Johnny about this. We were messaging back and forth, and he asked me about this, and I thought this would be a helpful tip to share.
Yeah, and like I said, all you got to do, if you want to use that to make your performance faster on your local system, just go into preferences and check that box, and then it'll use the smart previews while you're developing.
Perfect.
Yeah. I always had wished that when you're going in to select them yourself, like not during the import when they're already there. I just wish it was easier to actually find that command to do it.
Yeah.
Because I don't do it very often. I've found a couple of times they'll be there, and I'll spend 5 minutes just trying to figure out how to do it, and end up giving up.
Nice.
Yeah, their menus are not always intuitive.
No.
Yeah. That's yeah. There's always user experience that could be better in these software programs, so that's for sure. So TC said, I noticed a significant improvement in Lightroom's auto feature in the develop module. It really gives you a great starting point, and he's wondering if any of us use it.
I don't.
Nope.
Never used it either.
Sorry, TC.
I do know that the latest update, it's supposed to be really good. Apparently what Adobe did was they've got a lot of images from a lot of photographers and did a lot of testing to see how they were processing their images and built that into the intelligence for the auto mode. So.
Instead of literally just doing some default stuff.
Yeah, that's a smart way to do it. That's basically how, in part, how camera meters in the cameras work. They've got all of this exposure information in these little internal camera databases that they use to compare to the different scenes and the data that the camera's receiving through the metering module and say, okay, based on these reference points, this should be the exposure level or whatever it might be.
Should.
Yeah, should. Right, exactly. Yeah, so Peter doesn't use it. TC says, I didn't use it before the latest update. Tim says, I've only tried it a handful of times and didn't care for the results. I don't think I've ever, honestly, I don't think I've ever used it myself in the past either. Just because, I go in and I know, like, I know what I want to do in my image, and I don't expect Lightroom's going to know that.
Right. Yeah.
But I can see how it could be useful as a starting point, especially if a person is new to Lightroom or just new to editing, because I think one of the things that people struggle with in editing is like knowing what to do. And what I mean by that is you sit down and you want to edit your image, right? And you open up a program like Lightroom or On1 or Photoshop or whatever it might be, and you're presented with essentially an infinite number of options as to things that you can do. And you want to do something, but you don't know what. Auto is a great way to start because you can hit that button. You can see, oh, my image could look like this, right? And I could see where that would be useful for that. Once you get to a certain point where, like, your camera, your own images, your style, then it's not something that becomes as useful because the look you want to achieve for your own image. and you're going to achieve that by doing the things that you do.
Right.
Yeah,
Like I edit
get,
portraits differently than I edit landscape stuff. Like landscape stuff, I tend to bring my highlights down, whereas when I'm doing portraits, I tend to bring the highlights up a little bit. And
Yep. And as people get better, their exposures and their images coming out of camera are more consistent.
Right.
There's less of a need to use something like auto.
Yeah, that's another really good point. Yeah. Just like when you're shooting a scene and you're trying to figure out, what settings should I use and why would I want to use f2.8 versus f16 as an example, whatever it might be,
Right.
And the more you know about how your tools work, the better able you are to use them to do what you want to do with them.
Yep.
Oh, TC says, how are you all getting the @ with the name? Just type the @ and then it should start bringing up the name in the chat when you start typing it. So when I type @ and then I start typing TC, you pop up and I can select you and say, hey, like that.
And then enter.
All right,
he's on his iPad. Maybe it doesn't work on the iPad.
Well, it should. I think it should. You just got to hit that extra key or whatever to get to the @ Either way, we got about 4 minutes left here, so a couple of things. Number one, if you have any last-minute questions on Lightroom that you want us to answer, please drop them into the chat now. This is your last chance, last call for questions. Number two, yeah, there you go, TC. Number two, you should subscribe to both Dave and Mark's channels, and if you're not subscribed to mine, really, what are you guys doing? You're here. You should subscribe.
I can understand me and Dave, but you?
Subscribe. Now, Dave, you go live every Wednesday night at what time Pacific?
I go live 6 p.m. Pacific.
Okay.
So you guys do it weekly, right?
Yeah. Dave, you're weekly as well, right?
Every Wednesday. Yep.
Okay. All right, so I'm grabbing your link for YouTube. I'm about to drop that in the chat. And then, Mark, if you want to grab yours and drop that in as well.
It's in the description below, too, isn't it?
Yeah, it's in the subscription box below the video, or the description box.
Description, whatever that thing's called.
Yeah, so there's Dave's link. You should grab Mark's. If you guys aren't subscribed to all three of us, you should definitely do that. And Dave, we talked about me guesting on your show, so at some point you guys will be able to see me on Dave's show as well. Yep. We haven't set up when, so we'll let you guys know when that's going to happen. You can hop over there and see me with Dave. We'll talk about some different topic, whatever it might be. Who knows?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And you can find Dave at davedoeppel.com. Do you have a preferred social media outside of YouTube that you prefer people follow on?
I'm all over the place.
I see you just joined Vero.
I joined a few weeks ago, but then I saw, I don't know if you're familiar with photographer Greg Benz out of Minnesota.
No, I'm not familiar.
He created a panel for Photoshop called Lumenzia.
Oh, yeah, I just saw you talking about that panel.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And he had just posted a video talking about how great Vero is for photographers.
Okay.
The images look great on there, and they don't crush them, and so I jumped back on to look at it. But yeah, I'm on Facebook. I've got my you can find me at Dave Doeppel pretty much everywhere.
All right, I just dropped your link in there again. So if you guys want to find Dave, go to davedoeppel.com, and you can find him on different social medias, including YouTube. You know where to find Mark and me as well. Tom did have a last-minute question. This is really an important one too. I actually meant to talk about this earlier too, and I didn't. But Tom wants to know, what size do you make your images for social media? Long side in pixels. Says I'm 2048. Is that right? It's right depending upon the platform.
Yeah, exactly what I was going to say. I use 1080 for just basic stuff like Facebook or whatever, but I use different stuff for Pixieset and different for Squarespace. So
my understanding is that 2048 is best for Facebook because that's a signal to Facebook that this is a quote-unquote high-quality image, which minimizes the amount of compression Facebook does to it. Doesn't eliminate it, but minimizes how much. So for Facebook, 2048 I think is a good choice. For Instagram, I do 1080 because that's Instagram's native size, so that's also in theory going to minimize the amount of compression applied to the image.
Yeah, Facebook has made some changes though. There's a lot of like in groups and stuff now. The banner
are all
images,
screwed up.
Yeah,
they're like 1920 by 1080.
Yeah, they keep monkeying with stuff.
Yeah.
Gotta love Facebook. But yeah, 2048 is also like a good general web size too.
Yeah.
I tend to use 2048 just when I'm putting it on the web somewhere in general as well. All right, TC Connor says next blab equals how to Instagram. I would say no, because I don't know how to Instagram very well.
Yeah,
I haven't used Instagram for the last 6 months because I've been occupied with the house. So maybe a bad topic.
But I don't have a ton of followers, so obviously I'm not that good at it.
Yeah, I mean, my biggest success in social media, quote unquote, has been here on YouTube and making videos and connecting with people who love photography like I do through YouTube. So I keep my focus here, even though I am trying to branch outside of YouTube because I don't like being solely dependent on YouTube. How to remodel, TC says. Right. All right. It is 8:01. Dave, any last words you want to share with folks before we wrap this baby up?
No, thanks for everybody showing up and all the people that have actually been subscribing to my channel. I do appreciate it. I love teaching and helping people out, and love photography. So keep them coming.
Awesome.
Shoot me questions. I pretty much answer anytime.
You're right. Any last words, Mark?
Nope, I think I'm good.
All right, Dave, thank you so much for joining us tonight. It was wonderful having you here. Everybody, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it when you spend your time with us.
Oh, they're asking if you're twitching tomorrow.
Oh, am I twitching tomorrow? Crap. Maybe I'll post it out. I need to start editing again. I was planning on starting next week, but I might do it tomorrow. I'll watch my Facebook feed because I'll let you know there. If I do, it's going to be me setting up my new iMac for editing because literally I have none of my stuff set up for editing yet. So we'll see how that goes. Oh, if you want to know where to find me on Twitch, it's pretty easy, http://twitch.tv/Heniadis. That's my Twitch link. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We appreciate it. Once again, thank you, Dave, for joining us. Make sure you go subscribe to Dave, go subscribe to Mark, and get out there and take some damn photos. Yes. We'll be back next week. Adios, everybody.
Night, all.
The infinite wave, because I don't have a cool closing screen. I got to get one of those.